So I'm going to go ahead and get started so that I can hand it over to our presenters as soon as I've done the introductions. Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Grace Simpkins. If you have not attended one of our webinars before, if you have, welcome back. I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant, which is where I work, and it's located at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. To find out about future webinars, please visit our education website or follow us on Facebook. This is the 12th, so crazy, 12 webinars in a series designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts during these weeks of school closures. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, which is, if you remember, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Today, I'm going to be introducing you to Lieutenant Junior Grade Michelle Levano and Pete Holmberg, both hydrographers. They're going to tell you about how and why we map the seafloor, and it's so fun. Because this is Alaska Week, woohoo, we'll be talking about how NOAA does research and manages resources along the coast of Alaska, and we want to recognize that these are the traditional territories of the regional Native Alaskan groups who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and so much to share with us. Please forgive my pronunciation, I have been practicing, but the groups we wanted to recognize are the Inupiat, the Yupik, the Anunga, the Alutiiq, the Eyak, Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian. We'd also like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar from the land of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, Aquinnah. A few guidelines in case you're new to this before I hand it over to our speakers. You're all muted because we want to have, well, we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure everyone can hear our speaker. However, there's a box, as you've already discovered, where you can write your questions, and we want you to write those questions. I will be monitoring them as we go, and every so often the speakers will take a break and answer some of the questions that you put in that box. We might not get to all of them, but we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. Well, that's enough of me talking. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle as our first speaker. It's all you, Michelle.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Grace. So good day, everyone, depending on where you are, whether that's morning or afternoon, and welcome to Uncovering Alaska's Seafloor, Charting the Alaskan Waters. I am Lieutenant Junior Grade Michelle Levano, and I am a NOAA Corps officer that is currently working with the Office of Coast Survey.
I'm Pete Holmberg. I work for the NOAA's Office of Coast Survey as well, and I'll see you guys in a bit after Michelle.
Awesome, thank you, Pete. I am originally a native of Long Island, New York, and I went to school in Rhode Island studying environmental science, focusing on growing aquaculture, so raising and harvesting clams and oysters. From there, I lived in Virginia for about a year, and then I joined the NOAA Corps in 2016. The NOAA Corps is one of 8 uniformed services of the United States and has 321 members in it. These NOAA Corps officers operate and facilitate NOAA's mission and operations, including NOAA's fleet of 15 vessels and 9 aircraft. So far, my career has been supporting NOAA's marine mapping, otherwise known as charting mission, which we're going to talk to you about more today. So Grace, this is a question for the audience. What type of areas do you think we survey?
Okay, I'm looking at the responses. So just remember, you can type in your question box. What types of areas do we survey? And so Jonathan says the ocean. Michael says the water. Maria says the ocean floor. Duncan says where the boats often travel. Delaney says coastlines. Ooh, Ellie says underwater ravines and plains. And there are so many other really great answers. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for providing your answers, guys. Those are all fantastic answers. And I think Michael's answer covering the ocean is the broadest and all-encompassing answer that we could have. So NOAA's charting mission is focused primarily on rivers, lakes, and oceans and coastlines that have impact and that are frequently used. So that can be anywhere from like New York Harbor over here, where the ocean meets the city, and into the coastal rivers and state waterways that allow goods and services and people to move throughout the water. It can also be within lakes, such as the Great Lakes, like Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and out even lakes that aren't part of the Great Lake system. Additionally, we also have maps, or otherwise known as charts. Pete's going to talk a little bit more about this later, but stick with me, I promise it's worth it, of our rivers. So a lot of when goods and services and people travel by water, they often end up at the ocean. When the ocean becomes a river and you need to get more inland, rivers provide a really great opportunity for things to move either throughout the river to cities and large metropolitan areas, and also to lakes as well to get goods and services along. So Grace, I have another question for the audience coming up here just in a minute, but 54% of our waterways here in the United States have either not been charted at all, meaning that there's no information or data on that area, or haven't been charted since compact CDs, little DVDs, and what we used to listen to music on were invented, which is pretty old. So does anyone have any questions about the area that we collect information on and the US waterways?
Okay, I'm looking to see what some of the people are asking, and I think you're going to get this, so I will pass this question on, but if you're gonna get there, then you don't have to answer it. But a variety of people are asking, why do you map underwater, and what do you see? So Brenner asked, what do you see under the ocean?
That's a great question, Brenner, and especially the ocean makes up so much of, and waterways make up so much of our planet's surface. We can't possibly dive or put a camera underneath all the water. So how do we find out what's under there without physically going down under the ocean? And that's something we're going to talk about today. So I promise if you stick with it, we'll be able to find out more.
Okay, I have another
question for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I have a couple more questions if you have a minute or two.
Absolutely.
So Maria asked, do you have to recollect information because it changes over time?
Absolutely, and this is something we'll talk about. I'll ask you guys actually, what do you think some of the reasons why the seafloor changes and how it changes? Just like how when your birthday, when you grow from year to year, there are certain changes that happen within that last year. The same is true for the seafloor and information we collect.
Great. And one last question. Aoife and Colin were wondering what your favorite part of your job is.
The favorite part of my job is the fact that I get to be engaged with the public, and I am a civil servant, and I get to do these awesome presentations with you guys and teach more about NOAA's great work and mission. And then plus I also enjoy, I don't spend a lot of time at a desk, which is pretty nice. I'm out on the waterways or doing physical things with my hands most days, which is really rewarding and enjoyable for myself.
Great. I'm going to stop there and let you continue on because we'd love to hear more of what you have to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Grace. Well, next I would love to hear more of what the group has to hear. And who do you think uses our nautical charts or ocean maps?
All right, so the question is, who uses them? So Rebecca says she thinks ships use them. Kay thinks the sailors. Jason thinks maybe the Navy. Taylor, commercial fishermen or fisherwomen. Rob, mariners. Bridget says captains of ships. Everyone on a boat is what Duncan thinks. Crabbers. Ocean weather people, the Navy. Marine scientists, transportation companies. So many oceanographers. So I'll stop there, but so many great responses.
That's great. You guys hit the nail on the head. So I think a couple people had some, again, awesome all-encompassing areas, all people on boats. Well, I can't blanket and say, yes, everyone on boats uses our charts, but I wish they would, because there's a lot of really great information that's available on charts or maritime maps, which we'll talk more about during this presentation. But our industry goes to support everything from recreational activities, so that's when you're sailing or fishing or kayaking out with family and friends, to port operations, which is this bottom left picture here, which shows goods and services, so stuff, right? We put stuff in big boxes or containers and we ship them all over the world. And 90% of the goods in your house at one point were on a ship and then got to you either from train or on truck. So once these containers get lifted off the ship using these cranes, they're then loaded onto trains and trucks and distributed throughout the country and end up in your local stores, which is pretty cool. Charts are used for military operations, whether that's for the Navy or the Marines or the Coast Guard or any other country. NOAA provides all their information on nautical charts for free. So it's accessible to anyone. After this presentation, you can go on the internet and look up your local chart for your local waterway as well. And then last but not least, which we'll be talking more about today, really supports the commercial fishing industry. In order for, again, boats and goods, the fish, to move back and forth, the folks that work on the commercial industry need to know where they're going, which is the purpose of our marine maps and charts. So I have one last question for the group, and this was touched on a little bit, but what kind of events do you think would lead to a new survey or an area having to be surveyed?
Okay, I am looking. So, Delaney says maybe if a ship has run aground. James, nice. I think it's James, said maybe if, oh no, it's Carly. If there's an underwater earthquake, James says a storm, tsunami, hurricane, oil spill maybe, a volcano. Just looking to see if there are any different ones. I think I already said underwater slides, earthquakes, hurricanes, strange events. I love that because that's very all-encompassing. Erosion or strong currents and new construction. So yes. Yeah, I think that's a oh wait, I like this one too. A meteorite strike from Lori. So
that definitely could do it. Well, awesome. Thanks, guys. So as Delaney and James and everyone touched on, there's a whole bunch of things that can lead to changes in the seafloor. So one of the main things is the area has never been surveyed before, meaning that people might have been there, but no information or data has been collected in that area that has then been able to make into a usable format for people to use. Another thing is old age. So like when we talk about year to year, things change, and the same is true for the seafloor in the ocean. Different things happen, and some of those things that can happen throughout time are things like underwater volcanoes or earthquakes. We can have underwater different changes as well that occur when a ship runs aground. So that is when the part of the boat that is underwater physically hits the seafloor, which Pete is going to show you, talk a little bit more later on about the part of the boat that's underwater. And then other things like hurricanes can also change the seafloor as well, and things like ship groundings and hurricanes can lead to shipwrecks, which is when a boat finds itself permanently on the seafloor. So those all can impact the data and information that we display on our charts or marine maps. So with all that said, we're going to get right to it and we're going to start doing some work. So congratulations, you've been assigned a survey in Kodiak, Alaska. Does anyone know where Kodiak is, or has anyone on the line from or been to Kodiak?
All right, we're reaching out to those of you that are listening to this that are maybe in Alaska or have been to Alaska. Has anyone, I'm getting some no's. I will share with you, Michelle, that I have been to Kodiak and it is a really amazing place. Oh, so GS is saying they've been there. Kyle's been there. Rob has been there. Ethan really wants to go there, and it is an amazing place.
Ethan, you're on the right track. And we'll get to go there a little bit virtually today, but hopefully you do get to go there in person. So Kodiak is an island in the state of Alaska, up in the northwestern corner of the United States. We have a little red box on the screen drawn here around it. It's on the western side of the Gulf of Alaska. So Kodiak, let's zoom in on it a little bit more. And Kodiak's an island. So what that means is that there's no roads that go there. And everything that gets to Kodiak either has to get there by boat or by plane. So similar, I know there's a whole bunch of folks on the line from Massachusetts in that area, so similar to Martha's Vineyard and whatnot, right? Everything that gets to Kodiak either travels there by plane or by boat, which is pretty cool. So why are we surveying this area? Why did someone ask us to go here? The last time this area was surveyed was in 1933, and that was the time the refrigerator was invented. So that's pretty crazy. That's a long time ago. The economy, or an activity that stimulates a lot of jobs and money movement in Kodiak, is primarily based on the fishing industry. And that's both for subsistence, so where basically people are catching fish in order to eat it and feed their friends and family, or for commercial fishing, which means that they are catching goods and services or catching fish and then selling it out so that then you can go to the store and pick up that fish. Are there any questions in regards to why we're going to Kodiak or where it is?
So I have a couple of questions, but they're not directly, and this is somewhat applicable. So Ben asks, it seems like there's a lot of area around Alaska that hasn't been explored. So how do you choose where you go and you map the sea, how do you choose?
That's a really good question, Ben. So the folks that are asking us to assign surveys, one, you can ask for an area to be surveyed. NOAA serves the public, and we have what's called navigation managers assigned to each region. You can contact your NOAA navigation manager and say, hey, I noticed a couple of things were wrong on this area of the marine map or chart. I'm curious if we could get an update on this or if there's anything that can be done about it. Additionally, the folks that are looking and trying to evaluate where we're going to survey are also looking at ship traffic patterns. So where are areas that ships are visiting a lot of? The next thing they take into consideration is age. How old is the survey? Is it something that probably has a lot of changes that occurred to it? Or is this an area that is kind of old but probably hasn't had a lot of changes, as in there hasn't been a hurricane that's come through or there hasn't been a lot of vessel traffic? So I hope that answers the question, Ben.
I have a few more questions for you. Amy asks how long it will take you to survey. And if you're going to answer that later, then I can tell her to hold on.
Awesome. That's a great question, Amy. So we'll touch on that just a little bit, but how long it takes us to survey depends on, one, how big of the area we've been assigned to look at, and two, how deep the seafloor is underneath it. So when we talk about our specialized equipment on board, we'll talk about how that impacts the amount of time that it takes us to do a survey.
And so I have two questions together. Kay asks, have you surveyed it since 1933? And then Duncan said, if there's been a really long time between surveys, have you had any ships wrecked there because it's been so long and things have changed?
You guys are real detectives. So Kay, we have not surveyed it since 1933. So that's why we're going back to this area today. And part of the reason why we're going back there is to address the second part of that question. Are there any shipwrecks? Has anything changed? And what of those changes do we need to make sure people are aware of?
Okay, one last question and then we'll let you move on because I think this is a great one. Bridget asks, what time of year do you survey and does the weather affect how you choose that time of year?
That's a great question, Bridget. So absolutely, the field season, as we call it, or a period of time that we are completing this work and getting our mission done, typically is between early spring to then just about October, November. And then for October through early spring of next year, usually we stop operations so that we can conduct repairs, everyone can get a little bit of rest. We address any major issues that we're having with any equipment so that we can be prepared to go and complete the work the next field season. So weather absolutely has a part in that, mainly because the weather is usually nicer out at sea during the early spring and summer than it is during the winter.
Great. I'm going to let you move on now because we'll always have more questions.
Great. So the next question is, now that we know where Kodiak is and why we're going there, how are we going to get there? We're currently, at least I am, in Seattle, Washington, and Kodiak is about 1,500 miles away. How are we going to get there with about 50 people and a whole bunch of specialized equipment? We're probably going to get there on a boat, and or a ship. That is the easiest way to move a large amount of people and a large amount of goods in a timely manner that isn't super expensive. We could put everyone on an airplane, but just think of how expensive airplane tickets are. On the ship that we'll be traveling on is a 230-foot ship. A ship is kind of like a floating city. There's a whole bunch of people that live on board that complete a variety of jobs and tasks to make sure everything keeps running smoothly. These people live, work, eat, and sleep all aboard a ship, and many people call it home. So similar how everyone right now is in social isolation on a ship, it's somewhat like that all the time. You are doing everything in your home, and you've got 231 feet of that. So some of the jobs that people have on board are, we have our stewards, which make sure everyone has clean sheets and towels and keep everyone well fed and make sure everyone has 3 meals a day and sometimes dessert, and the ice cream freezer stocked. Next, we have our engineers, which make sure that the ship is running smoothly and everything is operating safely. The worst thing you want at sea is for something to break and go wrong, because you can't run to the store and go get it. So either if something does break, we have to make sure we have enough extra parts or spares on board, or we need to be able to make it and replicate and produce a new product at sea. Next, we have our deck department, which keeps everything looking great and shiny and keeps rust away and at bay, and also that serves as lookouts to make sure we're not going to hit anything while we're standing watch and the ship is moving throughout the water. Next, we have our survey department, which are the people that collect and manage all of our data and then make sure that it's all in the proper places and is properly being corrected and cleaned and applied. And then last but not least, we have our wardroom or ship drivers, and these people conduct maritime operations. So whether that's anchoring or docking or maneuvering the ship, driving the ship through places and getting from point A to point B. And we also, the wardroom and operators also do a lot of paperwork to make sure we basically have a book report of all of the activities that happened on the ship in one day, which is pretty crazy. Commander Little gave a presentation, a NOAA Live presentation a couple of days ago on the NOAA ship Oceanographic Explorer. And if you haven't seen that, I encourage everyone to watch it. And that really walks through a little bit more of what it's like to live on a ship and the different roles and responsibilities that people have on board. So now that we've gotten to Kodiak, Alaska, we are going out on a small boat, which is super exciting. These small boats are about 28 feet in length and can take about 4 to 5 people comfortably a day. So we're going on this small boat to see if we can find any hazards out at sea that we need to make sure people are aware of. So some of the things we're going to need while we're out on the small boat, because we're going to be out there for like 8 hours, which is the same amount of time that you're in school, but we're going to be out on this 20-foot boat, is we're going to make sure we have snacks and lunch. We're going to make sure we bring our sunglasses in case it gets sunny outside and we need to be able to see what's in the water. We're going to bring some water because we can't drink the seawater over the side. And again, we're going to be out there for 8 hours, which is pretty long. And then next, we're going to bring a jacket or a life jacket, some safety equipment to make sure in case someone fell in the water or fell overboard, we'd 1, be able to see them, and 2, we'd be able to get them. Does anyone have any questions about the ship or the small boat?
Yeah, so Kay is asking, do you take your mapping equipment onto the small boat?
Absolutely, Kay.
And I did not realize this, but someone shared with me bananas are bad luck on boats. I hadn't heard that. So Emily's wondering, what do you do on the ship? I think they're wondering, like, do you do scuba diving? What do you do when you're not actively mapping?
Awesome. So the ship runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So someone is always awake on board. And whether they're working, so whether they're doing either cooking or working in the engine room or painting or making sure the ship is moving safely through the water, or they're relaxing. They could either be working out at the ship's gym, they could be reading, playing music is a big hobby of people out at sea, knitting, crocheting, really anything, again, similar to probably a lot of people's self-isolation hobbies or similar to hobbies that people do out at sea.
Great. And we have a couple of questions about the small boats. So I'm going to kind of lump them together. Mary is wondering how many folks can fit on them. And Taylor's asking, why do you take the small boat? And someone else asked what it's like in the inside, because we can see that there's a deck and there's an enclosed space. So I think they're wondering what it's like when you go inside where we can't see.
Awesome. So Mary, there we can take about 4 to 5 people on the small boat before it gets a little uncomfortable. Again, there's only 28 feet, so just about a small school bus length of space to move around in there. So, and plus we've got a whole bunch of equipment on board. From this image, we can see that we've got like a cooler back here on the back deck. We've got this pot puller or winch. And then down here by these windows is the physical cabin. And we've got several computers in there and several computer screens as well.
All right. I think that's great. I'm gonna answer a few of these. Someone asked if there were beds. So you only sleep on the big boat. You don't sleep on the small boat.
That's
And
correct, yes.
And two people asked this, so this will be my last question, but folks are wondering if you've ever had to repair the small boat. Like what happens if something goes wrong and you have to make repairs? Can you do that while you're still on the big ship?
Absolutely. So these small boats live on the big ship in these kind of what we call davits, which are mechanisms or pieces of machinery that pick up and deploy or launch the small boats over the side. So if we were out on the small boat and we were having an issue with the small boat, we would call back to the ship and say, hello, we're having an issue. We would like to come back to the ship. And again, we have all of these individuals on board performing different jobs that are really critical to making sure everything stays running normally. So in an ideal world, we find issues before they happen and we can fix them or correct them while they're still on the ship. But if something happens out on the boat that we can't fix while on the boat, we call back to the ship. The ship will recover or the small boat into the davits again, or that machinery on deck. And hopefully we can fix it with the extra parts and spares that we have on board and our personnel knowledge on board as well.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna let you keep going.
Awesome. So next we're going to talk a little bit about the specialized equipment that we have on the small boat and on the ship. So what we have on board allows us to do our charting or ocean mapping mission. And this is called a sonar or a sound navigation ranging system. The sonar system uses sound waves to measure how fast, or I'm sorry, the sonar system uses sound waves to measure the speed to measure the seafloor. So what happens here is the sound wave leaves the bottom of the ship or the specialized equipment, hits the bottom of the floor, and then reflects or bounces off the floor. And the ship or sonar or equipment listens for that return of sound. We then know how fast sound travels through the water, and we timed the length of time it took the sound to leave the equipment, the sonar, hit the seafloor, and bounce back. So we have a stopwatch essentially that knows the time that it took to do that. And that's how we get the seafloor depth, which is pretty cool. Does anyone have any questions about that?
So really the one question is, does the sound affect the animals?
The sound on our equipment does not impact the animals. There was a previous NOAA Live presentation, which I hope everyone was able to watch, that talked a lot about the different sounds and frequencies that animals and marine mammals make noise and sounds at. Marine mammals make a much lower frequency within a sound travels through wavelengths. So we are operating at a much higher wavelength that I can't hear, you can't hear, your dog can't hear it, and other marine mammals cannot hear it as well. As a precaution though, when we do see whales and dolphins and other seabirds as well in the area, typically we'll just turn the sonar off. We'll either move to a different area, we'll just wait till the animal moves on by. And we do that in order because we don't, even if the equipment, the sonar does not disrupt the animal's behavior and influences them negatively, we don't want to negatively impact how they would naturally be moving throughout their environment, whether that's through mating or just eating or getting from point A to point B. And again, we have the flexibility to do that while the animal may not.
I'm going to just ask one more question and then let you move on because I know we want to get to Pete as well. But the question is how deep sonar can go.
Absolutely. So depending on the system, depends on how deep it can go. But the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean, can be mapped using sonar systems. And depending on how deep the water is, depends on how fast we can get a survey done. So the deeper the area, the more we can see out, so to speak, from side to side of the boat in the sonar system. The shallower or the closer to the seafloor that the boat and equipment is, the longer it's going to take us to get done in an area. So I know that's not like a direct question of like, oh, we can go up to 500, or a direct answer that we can go up to 500 meters, but it really depends on a whole bunch of situations.
Sorry, I'm going to let you go on.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I wasn't sure if there were any other questions. Thank you, Grace. So now that we know how the sonar works, it's time to actually get our operation and job done. So what we're going to do here is we're going to mow the lawn. Not like that. What we're going to do is we're going to use our equipment to drive the boat in areas and in a pattern so that we can find any sudden changes in depth, things sticking out the water, or changes in water color. So the water might always, you see it as either blue or green, but once you're staring at it for a really long time, you can see subtle changes that mean certain things when you're surveying. Changes in water can mean changes in depth. While we're surveying, we're always monitoring the depth that's shown in this window here. Now this is in meters. So right now underneath the boat, there are 45 meters of water underneath. If this 45 was to suddenly change to a 20, that's something we would get very concerned about, and we would want to figure out why, what caused that sudden change. If it was something gradual and we were moving closer to the shore, we wouldn't be as concerned about that because that's the natural way we expect things to go. But we'll also talk a little bit more about these colors that you see here on the screen and what those mean. So as you're driving along and you're in a boat, anytime you're in a boat, you always want someone looking out the window because you never know what you're gonna see. And hold on, wait, what is that sticking out of the water? Does anyone have any ideas as to what this object we see here in the water may be?
Okay, I'm looking for guesses. What is the object? Oh, Rebecca thinks it's a buoy. Ellie thinks it's an egg.
Ooh.
And Kay thinks it's rock or coral. Juan thinks it's balloons. Michael thinks an anchor. Delaney thinks maybe a crab pot. Jonathan thinks a coconut, a potato. Rebecca thinks, or maybe trash from Mary. A football, a ship, a snail, a kid's toy. Lots of great guesses.
Those are all really great guesses, guys. And like I said before, we can't necessarily put our eyes underwater and see what's there, nor can we dive on everything we see underwater. That would just take way too many hours. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our specialized equipment or the sonar we talked about, and we're going to drive around in this area and we're going to collect information on what this could be. Once we've collected this information, we're going to go back to the ship, to the big boat, and we're going to try to process our data and get a better idea of what this might be. So now that we're back on the ship, let's get a closer look and see what we found. Based on the shape, what do you think that object that was sticking out of the water could be?
Okay, Taylor thinks maybe it's a car based on that shape. Jonathan thinks a reef. Rebecca thinks a shipwreck, and nice. Ben thinks a log. And Emily thinks a water bottle.
Ooh.
Parts of a motor, a raft, a car. Yep, good guesses.
Awesome. Those are all really great guesses. But unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do and we can't necessarily dwell on this for too long. So we're just going to go out and keep collecting our data or information. And then Pete later on we're gonna dive into this a little bit more. So keep thinking about what this could be. But like I said, we've got a whole bunch of more information to get out there. So we're gonna go back and mow the lawn for a couple more days, anywhere up to 2 weeks. And look at all this data we've collected from the area that we were surveying. In this image, the colors do not represent the color of the water. They represent the depths of the water. So in areas where the map shows red, that's for shallow, or where the seafloor is really close to the surface of the water. And areas that are kind of more blue and purplish, that's areas that are deep, as in there's a lot of water between the surface of the water and then the seafloor, which is pretty cool that we know that information. And that information and these colors are not going to be represented on the chart, but information is going to be pulled from them that will be. So now that we've finished all of our data collection, we're going to do kind of a book report on the information we've gathered. And this is what we call a descriptive report. This is basically, like I said, either a book report or a science experiment explaining everything that we did, how we did it, why we did it, and anything we might have found. From here, we're going to take all of our information, we're going to pack it up in a portable hard drive because we collect terabytes and terabytes of data. We're going to mail it, put it in a box, and mail it back to our good friend Pete, who's down in Seattle, Washington. And he's going to double check our work to make sure we did everything correctly, truthfully, and honestly. And he's going to prepare this information for charting with the world. Does anyone have any questions before I hand it over to Pete?
You know what? I'm going to let you hand it over to Pete because I want to make sure he has some time, and then I'll save any questions for the end. Yep. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, Pete, the data is all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to have our MC switch control over to my screen.
Yep, I'm doing it right now. So hold on one second. Sorry about that, Pete.
Yeah, no problem.
There we go. You should be all set now.
All right. Like Michelle said, my name is Pete Holmberg, and I work for NOAA's Pacific Hydrographic Branch as a lead physical scientist. So unpacking that a little bit, Pacific, we're located on the Pacific coast, and we process most of the data collected on the West Coast and a lot in Alaska. Hydrographic, because hydrographic and hydrography deals with the measurement of water. And branch, we're a branch office in Seattle. Our main office is out in Washington, D.C., the trunk of the tree, if you will, and we're the little branch out on the edge. There is an Atlantic branch as well. So what do? I review and process data that we use to create nautical charts. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little later, but I look at, at my office, we look at and make sure that everything is correct in the report that Michelle sent in, and those sound waves that were used to collect the data. We want to make sure that those sound waves actually bounced off the seafloor and that we got measurements of the seafloor instead of maybe like a school of fish or some seaweed or other things. And we want to find out, what was that mysterious object that they collected? I'd like to know. And anything else that affected their data and how we can take care of those things. So that's what we do for processing. And I want to talk a little bit about, why did I decide to do this for a living? I really enjoy maps. I think that they're a blend of art and science because they have to be accurate and they should look good. Like, I've got this nice map of the San Juans, sort of a wooden map chart. I keep using those words interchangeably. I'm going to describe the difference between them. So I like that. And mapping is also like a sense of daydreaming and exploration. I like maps so much that when I do my own travels, I make my own maps. This is one of Burroughs Island in Puget Sound. And this is something that you guys can do on your own. You can draw a map of your backyard, or even maybe a place that you would like to go or places that you've been. So how did I get this job? I just want to talk about that a little bit. I grew up in Central Oregon, not too close to the water at all. But even then, I knew that I was interested in mapping. And I went to school at Oregon State University, and I got a job with the Forest Service as a hydrologist. And there's that word hydro again. And I was doing measurement of freshwater in the forest, but I really came to enjoy mapping and also doing water measurements and working around water. And so from there, I picked up a job with NOAA. So turning data into a map or a nautical chart, let's talk about the difference between that. So here's that data that Michelle collected. It looks pretty nice. And right now it's just overlaid on a map. And a map is an image that shows you what's what, but you can't navigate with it. So here, the data is overlaid, this grid is overlaid on a nautical chart. So traveling through here, I could use this information, these depths, these numbers, showing how deep the water is to figure out where I can go and where I can't go, and these little red markers or buoys. So I can navigate on a chart. So on a chart, we have buoys instead of roads like we do on street maps. And then we have maybe shipwrecks and rocks instead of large buildings. And really, you can use this to navigate your way anywhere on a nautical chart. So why do we need to map the ocean? I'm going to pause and see. Michelle gave some clues, brought it up a little bit. Does anybody want to give any answers why we should map the ocean?
So I'm looking at the responses to see what, I know some of this might be a little review, so you may have said it. So Kay says so that you can, so ships can navigate safely. And Taylor says so that you don't have a shipwreck. So Aoife and Colum say to find out, and to see what is new, so boats do not sink. Yeah, a lot of people are mentioning navigation to make sure that you can navigate safely.
All right, yeah, you guys have got it, exactly. So let's pretend for a moment that the bottom of this screen where I am is the surface of the water. And so if we've got a ship coming along here, sailing past, we can't see what's underneath the water surface. So we need to know what those depths are. So we don't hit anything, we don't have an accident. And this part of the ship below the water line is called the ship's draft. So the part of the ship's draft that's under the water, we need to make sure that that amount right there, that there's at least that much depth of water to be able to navigate over so that they don't hit anything. Other reasons that we survey is we share the data with other groups as well. Fish habitat, it's good to know where the rocky areas are and where the sandy areas are, and different fish like to live in different habitats, so we can keep better track of the health and quantities of fish that are out there. Tsunami modeling, this is a big deal in Alaska and really on the West Coast in particular. When there's a big earthquake, it displaces the water and the water comes rolling up the beach. And depending on the shape of the seafloor, if we have a really good 3D model, three-dimensional model of the seafloor, it can help us know how is that tsunami going to inundate? How's that tsunami going to impact cities and places where people live? And also for storm modeling. So how can we show 3D data on a flat map? Well, so first of all, let's talk about 3D versus flat, which is 2D. So here is a sandwich container. It's very flat. It's almost two-dimensional, 2D. But here it is in 3D. You can see much more depth and dimensions to it. I'm going to try. Here we are. If we've got Michelle's data set and we're looking at it, 2D is flat. I bump this up here, we suddenly got 3D, 3 dimensions, and you can see that. Even move around just a little bit. But that's really great. That's amazing. But we need to get that onto a flat map. So there it is. And how do we do that? We use contour lines. And so contour lines, they're here in blue, these dark blue lines. And you can see that where there's this orange shallow part in the middle, there's contour lines outlining that. Where there's this little sharp point sticking up here, there's contour lines showing that. So contour lines, if your vessel has a deep draft, you can know to stay on the correct side of the line, to stay on the deep side. Or if you have a shallow draft boat, maybe you can get into some of these more shallow waters. We also use sounding points. Sounding points are depths showing how deep the water is at each point. And each one of these numbers represents how deep the water is in meters. So those two things together can help us convey this 3D model onto a flat map. So once again, looking at 3 dimensions here, here's the ship, here's its draft under the water. And because this image is a little faded, I've highlighted some of the contours here in yellow. You can see those there. Contour lines and soundings on the shallow points, the very shallowest points. So the ship knows how to avoid those points in the water. Let's take a look at that strange object that Michelle found. I'm guessing you guys are curious about that. I'm still curious about that myself. There were some really good guesses as to what it was. So looking at it in 3D, here it is. I think I know what it is, but now that you guys can see it just as well as me in 3 dimensions under the water, what is it?
All right, I'm looking for guesses. James, Ben, Taylor, Julian, Kay, Rebecca, Cooper, Sloan, Jonathan, Delaney. I could keep going. Everybody's saying it's a shipwreck. It's a ship.
Yes. Yes, it's a shipwreck. You're absolutely right. Yep, you guys are right. And so that that little ball there on the top actually just turned out to be the navigation light on the very tippy top of the mast up there, and it's just got a little bit of green algae growing on it. When I first saw it, I thought it looked like a tennis ball, like maybe when you go past the, we go past the dog park locally here, and there's usually a tennis ball floating on the lake. So taking that back to our nautical chart. So here is the data updated on the chart. And there's a lot of different symbols, a lot of different parts to the chart. Here is the shipwreck that Michelle found being depicted here, and it looks like a shipwreck, and it's shown as a shipwreck that's above the water. And this is the symbol for any wreck that shows just above the water. On this nautical chart, the beige or tan is the land, the main parts of the land here, and then these little dots that are the same color. What do you guys think those are?
Okay, I'm looking for answers. What do you think the little dots are? Can you highlight them with your pointer again?
Yes, right here. I can even go and try to get the highlighter. There we go. There.
So a bunch of people think that they're islands. In fact, or hills, or a rock poking up out of the water, or maybe a buoy, a lighthouse, maybe.
Not a lighthouse. They are islands. We call them islets because they're so small in size, but also the people that said that they were rocks poking up out of the water, they're right too. So these snowflake symbols are rocks, but really, if you've been to Alaska, as a lot of you guys have who are attending, these are made of rock as well in this area. But once something gets high enough, once the rock is tall enough, it's not what it's made out of, it's how tall it is that decides whether we call it a rock or an islet, but it's just very small in size. So here's an island, a larger one here, and the small islets. And then we have the contours again, the darker blue as in shallower waters, and then it graduates to lighter blue and white getting into deeper water. And our soundings, which are the depths, showed in meters and tenths. So this is 0.8 meters. That's pretty shallow. That's less than 3 feet. That's very shallow. our contours. And this area here, this is a ledge. It's a rocky area that's between the low tide and high tide. And then this area here with the X's in it, don't go here. We call this a foul area. This is an area that Michelle's survey identified as not a safe place to navigate. Maybe there's a lot of kelp growing there. Maybe there was a lot of waves crashing and breakers, but it's just not a good place to go. Okay. Oops, I gotta turn off my pen. Okay. Are there any questions about the chart?
Yeah, so I have a couple of different questions. Well, so a couple questions that maybe about things you've already covered. Cooper is just wondering if you're going to investigate the shipwreck that's on the chart there.
Well, we're just going to chart it. I would have to read into the report if they actually, if the field party did dive on it. I'm not sure if they did or not. We do dive on a lot of the shipwrecks that we found. Our divers are authorized to dive to a maximum depth of 120 feet. At least the divers that we have on our survey ships. There are other NOAA divers who can dive to deeper depths.
Great. And Kay was wondering, how long does it take you to convert the data into your maps?
That's a really good question. It just depends on how complicated the area is. A lot of these areas in Alaska, there's 3 different groups of people who are involved working on this, and it can take up to a year to do it. Alaska is a complicated area because it has a lot of natural features, but then there's other parts of the country that are complicated as well because they have a lot of human-made features, a lot of piers and more shipwrecks and bridges and all kinds of things that need to be shown on the chart.
Great. I also have, so this just gets back to, how did you get the data to make this? I know Michelle said that she took it back to the lab, but there was a question, does it get mailed to you? Does it get hand delivered? How do you get the data from the ship back?
It gets mailed to us. It's so big. Some of our surveys are up to 1 terabyte in size, which is very, very large. So it's so big that it's just too large to be transmitted or attached to an email.
Okay, and so many people have asked this, and I think it's a really great question for you, is what is the most interesting thing or the coolest thing you've ever found or surveyed? A variety of people ask that.
You know, mostly shipwrecks, but it's interesting that they ask because in 2005, I managed a survey in Bellingham Bay, Washington, and there are a whole series of these pock marks, these kind of deep V-shaped marks in the middle of Bellingham Bay, and I could not figure out what they were. It's the only thing I could never figure out what it was. I couldn't. There was really no explanation for it. It didn't match up with anything geologically. And then just last year, because 2005 was a long time ago, Michelle Levano's field party went back there and she read the last descriptive report and said, hey, Pete, you were the last one to survey here. Do you remember these things? Do you know what they are? No, I don't. And eventually, Michelle's report did conclude that they were methane seeps. There were bits of methane coming up out of the seafloor. I did also get involved in a survey in Long Island Sound where we found an old rum runner ship. So it was a ship from the 1700s that sank and still had bottles of rum on it. But of course, we're not allowed to consume those while we're surveying.
I'm laughing over here. Thank you, Pete. I'm going to let you keep going.
Let's see if I can get control back with my slides. There we go. No, that was the end of my presentation. Just showing this area of the chart. I was trying to get this up before, showing where you'd zoom in and can see this little back bay. This is the new portion of the chart created from Michelle's survey.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple more questions then, if you're willing. Emily is really curious to know if you've ever found something you're not supposed to, like maybe something military that you were not supposed to have found.
Yes. I found some shipwrecks, and I should say every shipwreck that we find, we have to notify the State Historical Preservation Office for each state that we're adjacent to, and then show them the wreck, our imagery of the wreck, and say, can we put this on the chart? And if they say, no, that's sensitive, we have to just show it as an obstruction, or sometimes hide it as a depth instead of showing it as a wreck itself. We have been hired by, or not hired, we're all government, we have been asked by the Navy to do some private survey, some classified survey work for them before. And I've also, when I was on a ship on the Chesapeake Bay, a boat on the Chesapeake Bay, I was involved in looking for some bodies after a homicide, which is a little dark, but interesting things to be surveying for.
Okay, I told you someone was going to ask this, Pete, so it shouldn't come as a surprise, but John and Laura want to know if you've ever found treasure or gold.
Not yet, almost. My first survey ever was on the Potomac River in between Maryland and Virginia, and first thought that we found a submarine, like an old World War II U-boat submarine. I thought that was really interesting. It was submarine shaped. Sent some divers down on it, and it turned out to be this barge, and it was just loaded up with all these interesting chunks, these kind of nuggets. And I thought, oh my gosh, is this all gold? No, it was coal. It was a coal barge that sank.
That's disappointing.
So, a little disappointing. I still have hope, but no, I've not found any sunken treasure yet. And if I do, I might just not be working for NOAA anymore. So.
So someone here was asking, do you ever have to make the maps by hand, or when did people stop making them by hand?
It's been a very gradual thing. It was in the 90s when people actually stopped using a pen to manually trace the contours. And then really it was just over the last 5 years when we stopped digitizing the contours, using a mouse, which was a manual process, and to smooth those out. And just over the last 5 years has automation been getting computer learning to do it, being sophisticated enough to do that correctly, because we want those contours to be smooth, but they also need to be smoothed on the deep water side of where those jagged, really detailed contours are.
Okay, and I think maybe the last question is, what's the weirdest thing you have ever seen? Does that go along with what you answered before, or do you have a different answer for the weirdest?
The weirdest, down in Los Angeles, I don't know what it is, but somewhere near the inner harbor of Los Angeles, there is an entire structure that's completely underwater, and it certainly looks as if it was built that way. And it just looks like some supervillain's underwater lair, and I cannot figure out what it is. So that is definitely a very weird thing. Had to chart it as a giant obstruction on the nautical chart.
Great. I think that we're coming up on 3 o'clock, so well, Eastern time, sorry, not your time. So I think we're going to have to call it, but I just want to say, someone asked who started NOAA, and I didn't want to ask you that, Pete, because I would like to put that on all of you, especially for our return people. Do a little research and let me know next time who officially started NOAA, because that's a bit of a complicated answer, and I want to see what research you can do. So next week, I'll ask some folks to share with me what they found, but see if you can figure out when NOAA was started. When was NOAA started? So I want to thank Pete and Michelle. You guys did an amazing job, and it was really exciting to hear about how and why you mapped the seafloor. And I'll show myself as well how and why you map the seafloor, some of the interesting things that you find. So thank you so much for taking your time. We really appreciate it. I want to encourage everyone, we are back to 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Monday. We are leaving Alaska, very sadly, because we've really loved being with you all. And those of you in Alaska that are on the call, if it's too early for you, please then look at the webinar. We'll be taping it. And we'll also have Spanish subtitles. Starting next week, they should all be Spanish subtitle. So Monday's talk will be on Atlantic salmon. So please tune in at 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on Monday to hear all about Atlantic salmon. We're going from coast to coast as far as we can. And again, thanks so much. It was really great to hear you guys talk. So see you later, Michelle and Pete, and I'll see all of you next week.